Hello and welcome to AutoMoments. I've spent a lot of time talking about my personal 1972 AMC Ambassador, but the history of this car goes back much farther. In fact, at the time mine was built, Ambassador was the longest-running model name in America, unless you count the Chrysler Imperial, which started a year earlier but then became its own mark in 1955. For almost half a century, the Ambassador evolved, changing styles, sizes, and even brands. But today, it's largely forgotten, and its record of longevity has been surpassed by multiple iconic cars from around the world. The name has its start in 1927 as a four-door sedan version of the Nash Advanced 6. I couldn't find any record of why they called it the Ambassador, but it seems fitting for a stately automobile that often stood at the top of Nash's lineup. Like many smaller American car companies at the time, the Nash Motors Corporation usually competed in the mid-price field, the space between high-volume Fords and Chevys and luxury brands like Cadillac and Lincoln. In 1932, the Ambassador became its own separate model, and Nash made it their most expensive and luxurious car, powered by either an inline-6 or inline-8 engine. With their main factory in Kenosha, Wisconsin, Nash was one of the few automakers not based out of Detroit. But in 1937, Charles Nash retired and George W. Mason, president of the Kelvinator Appliance Company, replaced him. As a condition for taking the job, Mason stipulated that Nash Motors had to merge with Kelvinator and move their headquarters to Detroit, both of which it did. The majority of car manufacturing remained in Kenosha, including the Ambassador. Over the years, it gained innovations like Nash's advanced Weather Eye heating and ventilation system, and it became the first mass-produced unibody car in the United States with the 1941 Nash Ambassador 600 model. At one point, all Nash models were called Ambassadors, which was kind of confusing. After World War II, car production resumed, but without the inline-8 engine. Nash released all new 1949 models with radical air-flight aerodynamic styling. Derided by some as bathtub Nashes, sales increased nonetheless. Personally, I think it's an interesting riff on jet-age design that made Nash stand out from the big three. But I can understand how it's an acquired taste. 1950 was a year of firsts, as Nash became the first company to purchase hydromatic transmissions from GM for use in their cars. They also became the first American company to offer seatbelts, which most customers refused. Also, they introduced the first modern compact car, the Nash Rambler. An interesting option was Nash's bed-in-a-car feature, which dated back to the 1930s. Seats folded all the way down, making room for an air mattress or sleeping bags. Being an avid outdoorsman, Nash president George W. Mason saw the cars as excellent vehicles for hunting and fishing, as SUVs weren't really a thing yet. Today, the feature mostly serves as an excuse for old men at car shows to make dirty jokes. A complete restyling in 1952 was credited to the Italian design firm Pininfarina, but truth be told, Nash's in-house stylist Ed Anderson did most of the work. However, the name-dropping sounded better for advertising. In 1953, Henry Ford II launched an all-out sales war with Chevrolet, which he ultimately lost, but the collateral damage nearly killed all the smaller car makers. Of all of them, Nash was still the best off when it merged with a weakened Hudson Motor Car Company in 1954, creating American Motors Corporation. Shortly after, George Mason died unexpectedly, leaving his young protege, George Romney, in charge. With help from Nash's Kelvinator appliance division, 1954 models became the first American cars with an optional, self-contained underhood air conditioning system. It was far better, simpler, and cheaper than other automotive air conditioners, which often took up trunk space with bulky extra equipment. Plus, Nash's system integrated into the already successful Weather Eye setup. For 1955, the fabulous Hudson Hornet became a sibling to the Nash Ambassador, sharing much of the car's chassis and underpinnings, much to the disappointment of Hudson loyalists. For the first time, a V8 engine was available, provided by Packard. However, a dispute between the companies led to AMC creating their own V8 by mid-1956. A fun thing to mention, during the mid to late 50s, American Motors was actually a sponsor of the TV show Disneyland, and so there's a lot of fun advertisements featuring Hudsons and Nashes at Disneyland in California, and Disney characters showing up in TV commercials for the cars. Sadly, overall, Hudson and Nash sales continued to slide, as GM, Ford, and Chrysler drew away more customers with lower prices, greater horsepower, and constant styling changes. By 1957, the Ambassador's looks had become rather unconventional. Even though I like it, the rest of the public apparently didn't, and sales were dismal. With American Motors in dire financial straits, George Romney made the excruciating decision to end production of all Nash and Hudson models, and promote the Rambler into a brand of its own. The company refocused on compact, economical cars, finding a market niche that the Big Three had largely ignored. But the Ambassador name lived on. Afraid that the Rambler Ambassador didn't sound luxurious enough, 1958 marketing materials called the new car the Ambassador V8 by Rambler. Big difference, I know. Riding a stretched 117-inch version of the 108-inch wheelbase from the cheaper Rambler 6, the Ambassador had identical interior cabin dimensions, with all the stretch being added ahead of the A-pillars. Styling was mostly identical, although a new eagle and shield crest distinguished it from the cheaper car it was based on. And it was something about this badge that first drew me to these cars. I love the colors, I love the patriotism and dignity of it. I think it's a neat little piece of graphic design that perfectly represents the name, Ambassador. As Romney's economy car strategy began to work, AMC sales grew tremendously. The Ambassador remained the company's most expensive model, sharing body panels and components with the lower-priced cars, but offering exclusive trim and engine options. This arrangement continued until 1961, when the Ambassador got a bizarre European-style shovel-nose grille that only lasted 1 year. Never a good sign for any styling change. For 1962, the car lost its separate wheelbase and special name, becoming simply the Rambler Ambassador. Sales had always been modest, but the low investment needed for the Ambassador helped justify its existence. However, that was about to change. George Romney left AMC to practice politics, leaving a man named Roy Abernethy in charge. An all-new product for 1963 had already been finalized, and the sleek new Ramblers won Motor Trend's Car of the Year. But as the Big Three began to invade AMC's territory with cars like the Valiant and the Falcon and the Corvair, Abernethy decided to move upmarket rather than double down on compact cars. He dumped tons of money into new designs for 1965, further separating the regular Rambler, now called the Classic, from the upscale Ambassador. It had a separate wheelbase once again, plus a unique front end with a stylish, slab-sided body with a mini Lincoln Continental look. All models offered convertible variants, which were often costly to build and not always high-volume sellers. For some reason, the larger car now had an inline-6 as a base engine instead of the V8 that had been standard since the late 50s. Abernethy's massive investment seemed to benefit the Ambassador, as sales climbed significantly, but production of other models fell. For 1966, the car lost its Rambler name in an effort to further distance it from the Romney economy car image. It was now known as the American Motors Ambassador. Advertisements loudly proclaimed, "Now you can have your first luxury car while you're still young enough to enjoy it," presenting the Ambassador as a sort of discount Cadillac for the up-and-coming men of the corporate world. I think these are some of the best-looking cars AMC ever built. They're smooth yet sharp, eye-catching yet tasteful. It proves that they were just as capable of making designs that looked as good as anything the Big Three made. AMC stylist Vince Geraci once told me, "If those cars would have said Chevrolet on them, they'd have sold like hotcakes." Unfortunately, they weren't selling like hotcakes. Quite the opposite. Abernethy's costly attempt to move American Motors upmarket wasn't working, and he had also botched the company's attempt to enter the pony car game with the Marlin Fastback. By 1967, this was enough for the company's board of directors, and they forced him into early retirement. AMC's new leadership team would be the duo of Bill Luneburg and Roy D. Chapin Jr. With the 1967 models already completed, the Ambassador grew bigger and a little curvier too. It still shared some components with its little brother, the Rambler Rebel. This would be the final year for an Ambassador convertible, although the Rebel drop top held out until 1968. American Motors did get some much-needed quick cash when the U.S. Postal Service decided to buy over 3,700 right-hand drive Ambassadors to deliver mail. Those must have been some very lucky mail carriers. To help American Motors rebrand itself, and to spur some much-needed sales, Chapin hired the trendy ad firm of Wells Rich Green, led by the trailblazing Mary Wells. She planned a side-by-side campaign, featuring American Motors products next to their biggest competitors, and then casually explaining why the AMCs were better. This sort of direct comparison was unheard of in car advertising at the time and violated the unwritten social rules of the Detroit automakers. For cars like the hot new Javelin, the ads were easy to create, but the Ambassador presented a greater challenge. In her biography, she details how her team took a bunch of cars to an airport runway to thoroughly test and inspect them, saying, "We were having trouble with the Ambassador, American Motors' most expensive big car. American Motors was known for its sturdy Ramblers and Rebels, but not for luxury or style. The Ambassador was a good-looking, comfortable car, but we had to give it a new image so it could compete with the Chevys and Fords on their territory in people's minds. I've never inspected anything as closely as I inspected that Ambassador. Charlie and I measured the roof and the windows, and I actually crawled into the trunk to see if there was a good story in there, and then one of our little group that was going a little auto crazy said, 'What if it had air conditioning as standard? Would that do it?' Yes, we thought, that would do it. Air conditioning standard was unheard of in that class of car in the 1960s and would say more about the Ambassador's luxury and quality than all the clever advertising in the world. Automobile companies are not in the habit of taking advice on product changes from ad agencies, but I was willing to gamble that Roy would buy this idea because it was such a good one." Given Nash's long history with air conditioning systems, it seemed a natural fit. Working with AMC marketing head Bill McNeely, they convinced management to make all Ambassadors have AC as standard equipment. At that point in time, even Lincoln and Cadillac still charged extra for it. Immediately, the car stood out. Tongue-in-cheek ads showed Ambassadors side by side with vehicles costing twice as much or more. Brochures featured a maid doting over the car, and AMC dealers even offered chauffeurs so customers could test drive from the back seat. For 1969, AMC made the Ambassador even bigger with a 122-inch wheelbase. and the front end got a complete restyling. AMC's head designer, Dick Teague, used to work at Packard, and some say the Ambassador's stately new grille was his tribute to the luxurious Packards of old. Apparently, buyers loved it, as 1969 became the high watermark for AMC Ambassador production at 76,194 cars built that year. And at least 2 of those were turned into Ambassador limousines. Interestingly, the 69 Ambassador's rear half looked very similar to the previous year, but in 1970, it too got restyled. It's almost like AMC updated the body in phases, as if doing the whole car at once was too expensive. Its connections to the smaller AMC Rebel were obvious, as both cars shared everything from the A-pillar back. Similar to the late 50s, Ambassador buyers were really paying extra for just a stretched hood, with interior room identical to the cheaper cars. Body styles included sedans, coupes, and station wagons. Changes over the next few years were minor, but AMC began cutting unpopular options like the 6-cylinder engine and simplifying the cars by adding more standard features. It's funny to think of things like power brakes and power steering as luxurious when even the cheapest modern cars have all that and more, but it's just a reminder of how basic some cars were back then. By this time, AMC had pivoted their attention to the popular new Gremlin and Hornet models, not to mention their recent purchase of Jeep. The most notable change for 1972 was the switch from Borg-Warner automatic transmissions to the more advanced, more reliable Chrysler TorqueFlite, which AMC called Torque Command in their cars. American Motors never engineered their own automatic trans, most likely due to development costs. And that transmission is a big reason why I specifically looked for a 72 model when I bought this car. Although, I ended up having to get work done on it anyways, but thankfully now it shifts like a dream. My car has the 360 cubic inch AMC V8 with a 2-barrel carburetor and single exhaust. The base engine was a 304 and the top dollar option was a 401 with a 4-barrel and dual exhaust. Sadly, many 401 Ambassadors have been cannibalized so Javelin owners could have the big motors instead. As much as I wish I had the extra horsepower, the car doesn't need it. If you follow my Ambassador vlog series, you know this car has a reproduction brown vinyl roof, which includes these cute little bits on the rear door sills. The car definitely looks better with a vinyl top, as the proportions without it look a little awkward. If I'm honest, the Ambassador's entire shape is a little awkward, almost like you can tell it's riding a stretched version of a smaller chassis. But none of this really bothers me, as I still think it's a very handsome automobile, with its forward-leaning grille, quad headlights, long hood, and full-width taillights. Being the 1970s, the word Brougham was all the rage, and even AMC used it, in this case to signify the highest trim level. However, looking through this year's brochure, I see lots of options that my car doesn't have. Most importantly, a passenger side mirror, but also a 3-spoke steering wheel, power windows, cruise control, and an FM radio with 8-track player. I'm limited to an AM radio, which sadly doesn't work, and the air conditioning doesn't work either. It just blows lukewarm gasoline fumes at you. But I'm perfectly content with vent windows and these amazing footwell vents, which keep me cool on all but the hottest of summer days. Sadly, by 1972, the HVAC system no longer had the retro Weather Eye logo on it, but it does include the amusing max power desert only setting intended for use in high temperature, low humidity environments, where there's less risk of the condensation icing up on the evaporator unit. Another reason I wanted a 72 model is this absolutely magnificent horizontal speedometer. Not only is it surrounded by wood grain, it has wood grain on the inside too. Modern auto safety advocates would complain about the legibility problems, but I absolutely love this kind of 1970s tacky, mass-produced elegance. The Canadian brochure refers to these seats as perforated Uganda vinyl, which I have no idea what that means, but apparently the name didn't make it into the US market. Regardless, they're wide, flat, comfortable, and fairly durable. The passenger seat even includes a weight-activated switch that tells both of you to fasten your seatbelts. While the lap belts are retractable, the shoulder belts must be manually unclipped from the ceiling, then snapped into place. Compared to other 1970s luxury cars I've driven, the cabin is quite loud at highway speeds. The engine isn't particularly bad, but wind noise finds its way through every crack and crevice, making a symphony of rushing and whistling. I definitely need new door seals. And the car's flying brick shape probably doesn't help either. It doesn't struggle cruising on the highway, but I prefer driving on lazy back roads instead, keeping it between 35 and 55 miles per hour. The torquey V8 easily tackles hills, and the overboosted power steering allows the thin plastic wheel to turn with fingertip ease. To me, one of life's greatest pleasures is driving this old car along the countryside, admiring all the barns and streams and wildflowers, looking at how the corn is growing and seeing what all the farmers are up to. But back in the 1970s, Sunday drives were becoming a thing of the past, as the Arab oil embargo of 1973 drove up gasoline prices. Sales of AMC's small cars increased, but Ambassador sales, which had slowly been ticking upward, started to slide. For 1974, the Ambassador got a significant refresh, bringing it in line with other big, square American sedans. Compared to the bizarrely styled coffin-nose Matador with which it shared a platform, the Ambassador looked quite good. But for the first time ever, only a sedan and wagon were offered, as the Matador had a hot, new coupe body all to itself. Either due to the oil crisis or AMC's corporate neglect, Ambassador production sank to half the prior year. Obviously, the company's focus was elsewhere, with the new Matador Coupe and the upcoming launch of the AMC Pacer, which had been a very expensive and troublesome product already. Predictably, that meant the end for the Ambassador. The noble name, dating back to 1927, departed just 3 years shy of its 50th anniversary. Other than a handful of the Nash years, very few Ambassadors are highly collectible. However, I have seen some very nice 65-66 models that are probably worth 10 times what my car is. But I didn't buy an Ambassador as an investment. I bought it because I wanted it. There's something about that elegant grille, the stately name, and the tiny eagle and shield emblem. It's patriotic without being vulgar. It's dignified without being pretentious. The dictionary describes ambassador as an official representative of a country or cause. As the public memory of AMC continues to fade, it's up to enthusiasts to keep these cars alive. There are no corporate PR specialists or manufacturer relations teams for dead automotive brands. So, I'm thankful to have carved out this little corner of the internet, where people like you can enjoy automotive history with me. And I guess, in that sense, this car is an ambassador in more ways than one. Thanks for watching.